Ja, živijo. Zdaj bom kar nadaljevala v angleščini, ker vidim, da imamo tukaj veliko mednarodnih gostov, pa seveda naša govorca sta iz tujine, tako da good afternoon, everyone. Today is a beautiful sunny day here in Ljubljana, and we are gathered here to talk about a really heavy topic, possibly about the topic of one of the crime of, usually referred to the crime of all crimes, the topic of genocide and all its aspects, including the dehumanization that comes with it. So the racist belief that a certain group of people or certain groups of people are worth less, are less human or non-human, and therefore do not deserve the universal protection of human rights that is declared basic of our civilization. And today we will talk about specifically about the humanization and racism that is on the increase in European Union, specifically in Germany. Why we chose to talk about Germany? For three reasons, or for many more, but the three main reasons. First of all, for German historic responsibility regarding its genocide that it committed in the past century, namely the Harari and Nama genocides in Namibia, and then, of course, the Holocaust against the Jewish and some other minorities in Europe. And then the second reason is that Germany is today, again, heavily involved with what has been now numerous times referred to as genocide, or at least a possibility of genocide. And lastly, because in Germany, not only now, but for decades now, we see the rise of ideology, of anti-Semitic and racist ideology that brought us to the atrocities of the Second World War, the Holocaust, and we have to address all these aspects in order to avoid what happened at the time, and in order to prevent, or rather to stop, what is happening now in Gaza and in other occupied Palestinian territories. Today, we talk about the situation, we will talk about the situation in Europe, and we want to just make first a disclaimer that, of course, that is of a secondary importance. So we are here aware that our primary focus and attention should be on what's happening in Gaza, but sadly, our ability to be active and to protest and to speak against that is connected to the state of democracy, state of human rights here in Europe. So as these problems are so interrelated, we will today try to contribute our puzzle piece to this giant, horrific puzzle image, and we will speak about what's going on in Germany. I will speak from my personal experience, as I studied and lived in Germany for quite some time. And of course, while living there, seeing the situation closely, I've noticed there are many problems. And I've also met many great people who've noticed the same problems and were willing and able to discuss them with me. Some of them German, some of them people who moved to Germany from other parts of the world for various reasons. But because today the topic of our festival is racism, we are here with two members of minorities, of, if I can say, marginalized minorities in Germany, who will share with us their own perspectives, their own experiences, and together we will try to maybe give a voice or to show the image of Germany that is sometimes not shown, and it is very difficult to be exposed in Germany, in German public forums. So today we will speak about that forgotten aspect. So today, now let's move to really the core of our panel, to our guests, and let's welcome first Udi Ras, Jewish Israeli who moved to Berlin a few years ago, and Salah Said, who is Palestinian, who grew up in Germany, and I will now let them introduce themselves, so I don't speak for them, and they will tell you how they came to that country and what has been their experience living there as members of these two minorities. And maybe you can do it in a comparison how it was before 7th of October and after, and basically a bit about yourself. Okay.
Julio, marhaba. Thanks for organizing, first of all, and give space in this beautiful city to the really, really important plight, which is the Palestinian plight that is currently going through an ongoing genocide, a genocide that has not started on the 7th of October, but a genocide that has gotten more intense after the 7th of October. I'm Salah Saeed. I grew up in Germany, mainly in Berlin. My parents are Palestinians from Al-Bassa and Haifa, which is what you call today, or some call today, Israel. I call it the occupied Palestine. So when I strive for Palestine, I strive to my roots, and my roots are not in the West Bank nor Gaza. They are within the occupied Palestine. When it comes to growing up in Germany as a Palestinian, I can very certainly say that it was never an easy experience to grow up as part of any kind of person with a migration background or marginalized group or ethnic minority. But specifically for being Palestinian in Germany, it was never really a popular topic, not at school, not at university, not at work. When you would tell people you're Palestinian, it's often just like shut down or let's divert to another topic. And that is true for a lot of people from the Arab world, but specifically when it comes to Palestine, in Germany, there is no room for discourse. Germany had always a very firm stance on we will support Israel no matter what, unconditionally, despite the crimes against humanity that have started more than 76 years ago. So, having said that, I was still able to organize and to partake in different activations, protests, and activities, but with the 7th of October, something really horrific happened in Germany. And you might be saying, like, why is he overdoing all these Palestinian symbols? It's too much, we get it, you're Palestinian. But it's so, so important to me. Because one thing that happened in Germany was the ban of the Palestinian flag and the ban of the kufiyeh. And those are incremental parts of my identity living in the diaspora where I'm constantly being discriminated against and experience racism on a daily basis. So with that happening, I quickly realized that it's not really safe in Germany anymore to identify as Palestinian. And it's especially not safe when you organize in Germany for Palestine. And what then happened was a flat-out ban of all protests related to Palestine. And that in a country that claims to be based on fundamental democratic rights and human rights. The crackdown on pro-Palestine voices is that extreme that on a weekly basis we experience violence against women, children, and men, and especially violence against people within the queer movement for Palestine, and that the government does not make any difference between those people. But that it's also strategic, and that it's very, very targeted towards vulnerable groups. Imagine this, young teenagers who have made it to flee the genocide in Gaza and made it to Germany with not a permit to stay. They are being on a weekly basis brutalized, beaten, and threatened. There are specific tactics that the government is using against Palestinians and against anyone who shows solidarity with us. And it's important for us to call it out, which is why I'm very happy to be here, because one of my main missions, besides being a Palestinian, trying to amplify everything that is happening in Palestine and specifically doubling down on Gaza, where rape and torture and concentration camps are the reality of the terrorist entity named Israel against us Palestinians. Another aspect of my activism is to expose Germany's complicity in this genocide against my people. Thank you for having me.
Hello, everybody. My name is Udi Raz. Thank you, first of all, Eva. Thank you to Barbara. Thank you to anyone who was involved in holding the space for this fundamentally urgent and important talk that we're having not only today, but started yesterday and will continue also tomorrow. And thank you. Thank you to all of you. Thank you for being visible. Thank you for being loud. Thank you for showing solidarity with the people in Gaza who are being subjected to an ongoing genocide, to the people in the West Bank who are being subjected to an ongoing ethnic cleansing, and to everyone who lives between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, who is being subjected since 76 years to a state of apartheid. I am a PhD student at the Berlin Graduate School Muslim Cultures and Societies, which is based in Berlin. And I am also a board member of an organization which is called Jewish Voice for Just Peace in the Middle East, Jüdische Stimme für gerechten Frieden in Nahost. What we understand as just peace is such peace that can be generated through conversation, engagement, democratic engagement of anyone who lives in the given geographical area between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. I was born and raised in a city called Haifa. Does anybody of you know where Haifa is? Tell me. Occupied Palestine. Yes, correct. So whenever I ask this question in different among different audience, some other people refer to this area as Israel, some others to Palestine, to refer to this area as Palestine. What I want to say by this is to acknowledge that the discussion that we're engaging with has less to do with symbolism as such and more with a discursive discourse that defines the living reality of the people who live there. And this is what we are going to talk about today. One more thing. One more thing. I moved, you asked about how does it feel to be a minoritized group in today's Germany. I moved to Germany following the promise to live in a place that upholds democratic rights, that uphold human rights, that uphold legacies of international law. All those legacies that were introduced into the world with the blood of more than 6 million Jews. So I came to Germany convinced that Germany has reflected Germany, whatever this means, right? But those who are leading the nation, the country, Germany's political elite, I thought they have been through doing some denazified reflection of what happened before. And I moved to Berlin. This is important for me to stress. I moved to Berlin, not to Germany. And since the 7th of October, I think the most fundamental lesson that I learned is that now Berlin, unfortunately, became Germany.
Very accurate.
Thank you both for sharing your reality with us. Now we will go into the discussion where we will seek to address the reasons for that reality and maybe to also seek for where there is room to improve or to at least call out the roots of that situation. And maybe the first root to start with is the education system. So when we look at the German education system, and that is again based on our perspective and perspective of those we've talked to, we can certain loopholes in that system that is otherwise, in comparison to the world image, extremely progressive, socially sensitive in various different areas. But there is a loophole with regard to Palestine and Palestinians, and this loophole is becoming more and more obvious. And what I mean with that is that in Germany we can experience a huge lack of understanding of Palestinian perspective. There is a lot of sympathy and a lot of understanding for Jewish pain and Jewish trauma. Maybe we can talk also about that it's enough or not enough, but definitely it is there also a lot of understanding for Jewish culture. But there is really a lack of knowledge about the illegality and brutality of Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories. When I studied law in Germany and talking to my friends there, I realized that they do not know about certain decisions of International Court of Justice, the advisory opinion from 2004, that was for us here basic learning material about the extraterritoriality of human rights, the application of human rights on the occupied territories, on the occupation. They didn't know about the existence of it. So there is a huge gap in the education system regarding those issues. there is no knowledge on the systematic imprisonment of Palestinian children and juveniles. There is no knowledge on the appropriation of natural resources, and no knowledge on the apartheid regime. Usually when you try to speak about those topics, you are immediately dismissed with saying it's not that simple, that simplification, it's complicated, we don't have enough information, but people don't search for this information. So we have recently read also about some more extreme examples that just mere ignorance to that topic. I've read that in some German schools the leaflets were given out to children that, for example, Nakba is a myth and should not be talked about. Then we can speak about the cancellation of several academics who try to address this topic. For example, Nancy Fraser at the University of Köln, where also I studied, she was uninvited because of her speaking out for Palestine. And also Udi, your job cancellation about mentioning the word apartheid. So can we talk about that? Can we talk about this lack of understanding and lack of attention to the issue of Palestine in the educational process? Whoever wants to start.
Go ahead.
All right. So, you know, listening to you asking the question, I had to think about slightly different contexts, but I think it's quite telling. And I want to tell this anecdote. In the 90s, I believe it was in the 90s, political artist Meir Gal introduced a very powerful piece of art. He took a picture of himself holding a book by 9 pages out of 400 of the book, and you see Meir Gal holding the book, and the book basically, like most of the book is not in his hand. And the piece is called 9 out of 400, and the book which Meir Gal holds is education, a book that has been implemented within the Zionist education system that was compulsory for everyone who learned history within the Zionist education system. Up until the 70s, this book was part of the curriculum, so to say. Now, these 9 pages out of 400 are the only 9 pages within 400 pages book that touches upon the fact that Jews did not originate only from Europe, but the fact that, in fact, actually most of the Jewish population who live nowadays in Palestine originated from countries like Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, Yemen, you name it, the Muslim Arab world. Only 9 pages are dedicated to their living realities. The rest creates the understanding that Judaism should be, the Jewish history is equal with European history and vice versa. And the reason why I'm telling this is because within Zionist education system, we are witnessing a very clear approach that can be framed as Orientalist approach. This is the idea that the West looks at the rest, so to say, and tells everybody what should be talked about and what is less relevant, and so on and so on. Now, in the case of Palestine, this is in Germany, this is an extreme case, because it's not that we are talking about 9 pages out of 400. We are talking about books that were written in order to play down and to literally engage in an epistemicide action or practice towards Palestinian being, toward Palestinianness, toward Palestinian history, Palestinian culture, tradition, and so on, and so on, and so on. And this is the living realities of Palestinians nowadays in Germany. We are talking not only about genocide, but also about epistemicide, that is the destruction of knowledge.
Thank you. Thanks so much, and I fully support what you're saying. I think when it comes to Germany, it's literally suffocating anything in regards to Palestinian history, culture, identity, and they do this pretty much with holding up that this is the democratic value and Palestinians don't have a right to exist, but everything related to Israel does. And it really stems from this idea that Germans can't forget their real racism and the Holocaust and all the crimes they committed against humanity by now standing and siding with Israel, which is crazy in itself because they're supporting an apartheid regime, they're supporting genocide, they're supporting all these crimes against Palestinians. and they literally meet the war criminals. The German elected officials meet the war criminals, shake their hands, and pretend that we, the Palestinians in Germany, which is, by the way, one of the largest diaspora groups out of the Middle East, it's in Germany, we're being disregarded. We're not being seen. When we take it to the streets of 15,000 or 20,000 people, but I live in a reality where every fucking single government building has the Israeli Zionist terrorist state and flag on their building. How should I feel? Why am I not being respected? Why am I not being seen in the society that tries everything in the power to downplay me? And what Germany then does is to use Zionist narratives. Something like Palestinians doesn't exist. It's Arabs. They left voluntarily. Genocide never happened. It's not apartheid. It's just always coming, as you're referring to it, as something more complex. But it's as simple as this is settler colonialism and terrorism, and we have to call it out, and we cannot make an exception because this terrorist entity claims to be Jewish. I don't give a fuck. I'm Palestinian. I'm from the Middle East. Anti-Semitism was created in Europe, and we from the Middle East have no fucking thing to say about this because it's not an issue we created. So when Germany is trying to put this all on us and say anti-Semitism is something that Palestinians or Middle Easterns are importing into Europe, my only answer to this is, fuck you. It's not gonna happen. It's your problem. You created this. And then going to the reality of living in a country that is institutionalizing, revising history, neglecting the Nakba, neglecting the identity of Palestinians and the plight, the terror our people had to go through beyond Palestine, is something that Germany is really proud of. And I want to remind you on something. Like, what did Germany do within the last 10 months alone? Not acknowledging the Palestinian state despite claiming therefore a two-state solution. What did Germany also do? Germany was actively obstructing humanitarian aid towards Palestine by freezing funding to UNRWA. Germany also increased its arms and weapons delivery to Israel by 10 times, being paid by German tax. What Germany is also continuously doing, besides repressing, beating, and suppressing us in Germany, is to really make sure that the war criminals, despite ICJ ruling and like the decisions made on international level, is being downplayed and is being portrayed as less irrelevant. And the last thing that Germany is doing is obviously not speaking about the genocide. So if I do everything in my power to get one image out from Gaza, where people are putting their life in danger to get one picture out for us, for the world to see, where other people are using stupid AI shit to create an image that isn't even real. Germany has not once reported one single picture of Gaza and what is happening to the Palestinians. And that is the reality.
Thank you. So this leads me basically to that fact that when we don't speak about Palestinian identity and Palestinian history and Palestinian reality, that leaves a population with a false, incomplete image of what Palestinian means. And therefore, there is a lot of room for stereotypes to emerge. So based on certain historical terrorist suicide bombings and so on, the whole population is associated with individual acts of violence. The whole population is associated with terrorism, violence, barbarism. So yeah, I want to ask you, maybe also just to add to that, that it was really visible when we were following the debate after the 7th of October in a German public TV and with German officials. First of all, there was really little room given to actual Palestinians. There was a lot of room, of course, given to the Jewish people who could share their trauma and their fear that was shaken up by the 7th of October attack, but there was almost no Palestinians who could share about their own trauma of what was unleashed on them at the time. And even when they were given the time and the place to speak, they were first asked to denounce terrorism and to distance themselves from terrorism. Just like the default mode would be that they support it unless they specifically distance themselves from that. What does that tell us about how Palestinian identity is understood in Germany? And I mean legally, Is it recognized sociologically, symbolically, culturally? What does this tell us about what image is then understood in the society?
Maybe just really briefly, obviously within society there's a very, like, a portrait painted about Palestinians that is very dehumanizing. We don't have culture, food, all of these things are just being completely neglected, despite us being a huge community in Germany, contributing to German wealth and being part of that society, despite the fact they don't want us there. Despite the fact we actually don't want to be there, because if we could go, we would be gladly in Palestine, just to make that clear. So when it comes to the understanding of what Palestinian identity is, as I said, it's not being understood. There is no room for it. There is no space for it to be portrayed and talked about. And as you also pointed out, we have to defend ourselves. Whatever we do, like, dare to grab a mic in Germany, being Palestinian, start to speak up without starting with, I condone, I condemn, and you have to defend yourself. And I'm not defending myself, because is Israel being held accountable for the terrorism, for the rape and torture it's on a daily basis exposing Palestinians to before the 7th of October? Why should I distance myself from a crime I, as an individual, haven't committed? And despite the fact me not identifying maybe with the resistance we're currently seeing, I will forever support any armed resistance against a colonizer and oppressor. And that is our right under international law, and we will never refrain from it. And I'm going to give you an example. When we look at slavery in the US, and we would see black people being brutalized, enslaved, all of this, would anyone today dare to say that no, black Afro-American slaves should not use violence to free themselves from slavery? Would anyone ever dare to say this? So I'm making this comparison very, very clearly, because the reality of the Palestinians is they are not just occupied, they are being ethnically cleansed. And what we're seeing today is just the cherry on top, the extreme violence being brought to us. So when it comes to Germany, it's just about neglecting this. This is not happening. It's not a genocide. It's not apartheid. It's Israelis. They have a right to defend themselves. Who said they have a right to defend themselves? Who said they have a right to exist there? Just because they came and they stole land, I, as a Palestinian in Germany, if I'm a refugee and I come, there's this new policy that says, well, if you want to be a German citizen, then you have to accept the right of Israel's existence. Are you fucking kidding me? There's a person that comes from Palestine that his whole family, children, mother, father, were slaughtered and killed and tortured and all of that. That is unspeakable. And then I should say, hey, dear Germany, please let me be a German citizen because I'm a refugee and I have no other place to go. And you will say, yeah, of course, but sign this letter and accept the Israeli existence. Like, fuck no. And I'm sorry for being so enraged. But if we're on a daily basis exposed to see what is happening to our families and friends, then it's our right to be enraged. And it's our right to be not politically correct. And it's our right to be outspoken about the atrocities without having to explain ourselves in a very articulate Western way that is expecting me to be understanding and having perspective. I expect all of you to see my perspective and to finally see Palestinians as who they are, not in a dehumanized way.
So now let's move to the combination and the coexistence of the two minorities that we are talking here and that are actually in the forefront of the discussion in Germany now for the last 10 months. So it seems in the public discourse held by the German authorities that it's very often that these two minorities are presented as naturally hateful to each other, kind of like, you know, it is automatic that a Jewish person hates the Palestinians because they're against each other and they're denying their the right to exist, and it's automatic that then a Palestinian person feels the same towards the Jewish. But let's dismantle this stereotype and this false narrative Why is there even a narrative that these rights of the people that both stem from what has been historic Palestine, so the Jews and the Muslims and the Christians also, why are their rights mutually exclusive? Why they cannot all assert their own pain, their own trauma, their own rights, and stand in that together? Why does it mean that only one group can have rights on the expense of another? Because that is at least the discourse that I am understanding. And maybe that an example of that was when we protested in Germany using the slogan "Stop the Genocide," and the German authorities kindly explained us that it is anti-Semitic because we are accusing Jewish people that are actually completely identified in the German eyes with the Jewish state. We are accusing them of something they didn't do, and now we are creating more hatred, so we are inciting to hatred. So why is it that when one group says that it's genocide being committed against them, that immediately means that they are trying to take away something from the other group? And this question is addressed to you, Udi, because you are researching exactly that, like the interrelation and the interaction of these two minorities. Why they cannot just exist with their own personal experience, their own personal trauma, both recognized and then resolved in a communal and in a dialogue way?
Thank you, Eva, for the question. Maybe it was stressing first that those who are in power nowadays in Germany would look at us and call us enemies. So, I mean, if you look at this and call this enmity, you are engaging in a practice that we also know as gaslighting. And in order to understand why we end up needing to reconsider again and again and again what is it this enmity that does to us, makes sense to look at the mechanism that actually creates the necessity to constantly gaslight each other, allegedly. And maybe it was to take a closer look at those who are in power in Germany, those who control the discourse. Let me ask you this question. Nowadays, in the German parliament, in the Bundestag, do you have a rough idea of how many parliaments are sitting there? It's about 700 something. Right? How many of these 700 individuals self-identify as Jews? Do you have a rough idea? None. That's a very wild guess, and it's very correct. None of the people who sit nowadays in the German Bundestag self-identify as Jews, and they all claim that the politics that they are engaging with is designed to protect Jews as Jews. Now, since 2018, there is a new position within the political system of Germany, which is called the Commissioner for Jewish Life in Germany and the Fight Against Antisemitism. You find this position on federal level, on state level, on municipal level, and also within the executive bodies of the German state, for example, within the Berliner police, for example. None of those commissioners self-identify as Jews. We have an entire system that controls the discourse about Jews, putting us into categories of Jews one can utilize in order to promote a nationalist project, and Jews who allegedly impose a danger to this nation, not only impose a danger to this nation, but to Judaism as such. Now, I was studying in the last 4 years different social initiatives that, according to the self-definition, would offer rooms for Muslims and Jews, Israelis and Palestinians, Arabs and Jews, and so on, all those enemies, to come together. And I showed through different examples that whenever we meet each other under the title of allegedly fight against Muslim anti-Semitism, we'd get resources, we'd get budget, we'd get room, would be celebrated by the media and by politicians. But whenever we meet each other auf Augenhöhe, as equals, those who are in power, we meet each other, by the way, also to reflect what is it that we, Jews, specifically Israelis, who migrated from Palestine to Germany, what is it that we know about Muslims, about Arabs, about Palestinians? Whenever we dare to reflect on this, those who are in power point at us, call us anti-Semites, and subject us to boycott the divestments, and sanctions. This is the living realities that we're witnessing nowadays in Germany. And what it tells us is that Germany does not care about Jews as Jews. Germany cares only about those Jews who are willing to reproduce anti-Muslim racism. And we need to keep in mind that Germany's own attempt to self-define itself nowadays is very much rooted by looking at Muslims, at Islam, at the Arab world, at the Orient, right? So everything that the Orient is what Germany is not. So imagine Jews who feel themselves as rooted, as belong to the Orient. We don't get a room in Germany. We are being marked as a danger to the nation and to Judaism.
Maybe just adding on that, when you say like you being marked as a danger, like this is a real thing. This is happening in Germany, where someone like Udi or me would constantly get visits from the police to threaten us and to say we are posing a threat to public society because we take it to the streets. And the only reason why we have to take it to the streets is exactly what you said before. There is no political representation whatsoever that listens to us, that sees us in a so-called democracy. So it is pure intimidation and terror tactics against those that are going against the mainstream. And that is so dangerous. And I'm saying this also because Germans need to understand that in Germany you say like this weird word, Bio-Deutsch, like bio-Germans, like when you don't have any other background, Aryan, I don't know. So for those people, it's so incremental to understand that this is a threat to what they call their democracy and what their values are and what they're proud of. Because if this is happening to us, the silencing, the intimidation, these techniques to really break us, it's very likely going to happen to them. And what we're seeing today in Germany is the uprising of an extreme far right, extremely high. Like just 2 weeks ago, Nazis flooded the streets of Leipzig, going against queer people and against Muslims and all other minorities. And the reality of that is not a government that is right. The reality that has fueled that hate and anger and discrimination and racism within the society is a current government that is a coalition of social democrats and the Green Party that is supposed to be center to left, but is doing everything in their power to do brown politics, basically racist politics of deportation, no refugees welcome, anti-Palestinian racism and discrimination, and all of these sorts. So it really is important not just for those impacted directly by the war, but it's incremental for every citizen that stands for humanity, for human rights and democratic values.
So if we stay on that issue of extremism, of the rising extremism, so of course there are certain kinds of extremism on the rise in Germany, like we see different groups organizing, getting violent, including also the certain Islamic extremists, but they are usually given a lot of attention and discussion, but when it comes to the extremism that you pointed out, so the extreme right-wing extremism that is sympathizing with the Nazi ideology that led to the anti-Semitic policies that resulted in the Holocaust, when we point out to that, it's kind of, yeah, but it's an old problem. That's the answer usually. And how can we address it? It's not how can we demonstrate that it's not an old problem? That is a problem that is on the rise right now, and there are people who are wearing Nazi symbols, the symbols of the Third Reich. They're chanting the Nazi slogans. They are not just some people who are afraid of migrants and so on. They are really people who are supporting that regime, knowingly what that regime did. And how can we demonstrate that it's a real problem when we have, even on the demonstrations against that regime, so when we have anti-AfD demonstrations, when we have their racist behavior against the Palestinians, it's very hard to call out the real extremism when, like you said, the center left is already anti-certain groups and anti-certain type of Jews. How can we address that?
I think it was maybe taking a look at the genealogy of or like the history of certain ideas, how we ended up with the situation that we're witnessing nowadays, an ideology that creates the language needed in order to justify a genocide, justify ethnic cleansing, justify a state of apartheid. And I think when it was taking a look specifically at the idea of Zionism, where it comes from. The first Zionist Congress met in Basel in 1897. And around the time that the first Zionism took place, it was a peak of European colonialism. 10 years, a bit more than 10 years before, in 1884, there was another significant event, namely the Berliner Conference, the Berlin Conference, which took place, how surprisingly, in Berlin, where the most powerful women and men of Europe met in order to, sorry, by the way, it was a joke, there were no women in the room. The most powerful men in Europe met in Berlin in order to divide Africa among themselves. Now, 1 year before the first Zionist Congress took place, so I'm talking about 1896, there was another remarkable event took place in Berlin under the name the Berliner Ausstellung, Kolonial Ausstellung, which is the colonial exhibition. It was a huge propaganda advertisement campaign ran by the Kaiserreich in order to promote among Germans the idea of investing in colonialism and basically to show how we all allegedly profit from engaging in colonialism. So when the first Zionist Congress took place, they were introducing the idea that Judaism is not really a category of religion, but much more a category of a nation, right? And if we think about the time that Zionism emerged, also you see it, by the way, in the writings of Theodor Herzl, who is considered to be the father of Zionist ideology, you see that the Zionist ideology addresses what they perceive as the Jewish question. And we know what the Jewish question leads to, right? Now, what the Zionists did was to claim not that Judaism is should not be understood as another a group, because in fact, when you think about it, why the first Zionist Congress took place in Basel is because it originally was actually planned to take place in Munich. And the reason why it didn't take place in Munich was because the Jewish community, rabbis in Germany, united in order to push away Zionism. Because for them, they did not see a contradiction between being Jewish and German. They didn't see a contradiction between Jewish and Polish, Jewish and Slovenian, Jewish and French, and so on and so on. And yet, for Zionists, the claim was Judaism should be perceived as a different category of human beingness, but in contradiction to anti-Semites, they said, we are as superior as all European nations are. And when the first Zionist Congress takes place, the discussion is not whether Jews, Zionists, should have a colony or not, but the question was where Jews should have their colony, in Argentina, Uganda, Palestine. Later on, the Nazis introduced also the idea of Madagascar. So this is the Zionism that we are still stuck with nowadays. Because during the extermination of the Jewish population of Europe, we were talking before about the fact that genocide also equals epistemicides, most of the Jewish population of Europe, how surprisingly, was not convinced by Zionism before the Holocaust. Most of the Jewish population of Europe upholded anti, or at least non-Zionist approach, and they all perished. Zionism remained the main ideology that governs the understanding that Judaism equals Zionism. And this is what we're witnessing until nowadays, and this is exactly the reason why Aryan supremacists nowadays in Germany find Zionism so useful,
Maybe just adding on that, right? Like the iteration is Nazis are standing together with Zionists and they're supporting each other's ideologies because it's less harmful for them and it's better to connect against the real enemy, which could be Palestinian, Muslim, or any person from the Middle East. And that's the reality we're living in. I think the double standard we need to call out, if we go to climate change protests or anti-fascism protests, and where a lot of people gather and say like, yeah, we're all for diversity and inclusion and all these, tolerant and democratic things we're sharing with each other, but certain groups are being excluded because they don't fit their definition of what diversity and inclusion should mean. It really also shows you the colonial idea of their definition of something that they think they have invented and they are better in, and they understand diversity and inclusion better. And we heard this in the panel before, where literally all those great values that those communities bring are being exploited to an extent where they don't mean anything anymore for the sake of them feeling good. So when we went to those protests and experienced people spitting on us, people physically beating us and going aggressively against us because we're carrying a Palestine protest, to a protest that is for diversity and inclusion, then it really just showed me that this is all bullshit and that these people don't really understand the real value of what they're going for and what they're standing up for on the streets. It's a designed, manufactured idea of what DEI means to an institutionalized system like the government of Germany, or to what corporations think it should be. And why I'm saying this is because we all need to understand that the Palestinian plight and our struggle is so interconnected with so many struggles across the globe, including climate justice, and where green claims and greenwashing and reforestation projects are built on former Palestinian houses to hide their reality, to hide where they're from, where our soil and grounds are being destroyed and our biodiversity and ecosystem are being destroyed by bringing plants and species here from Europe to Palestine that don't belong there. It's an existential threat, and when we say genocide against the people and the ethnic cleansing, we also have to acknowledge the fact that it's an ecocide, and anyone who stands up for climate justice should stand up for Palestine now as well. And anyone who stands up for queer rights should now stand up for Palestine as well. And anyone who's standing up for the Black Lives Matter movement should stand up for Palestine as well. It's interconnected, and people need to understand that in order to make a real change and in order to abolish these horrific colonial systems we're living in.
Thank you. Yeah, that was one question that I've prepared was exactly on that. Like, why are the extreme right parties that are historically anti-Semitic, supporting anti-Semitic ideologies, also supporting so unequivocally Israel and the government of Israel? But now you already answered that.
I mean, maybe just to put it in one sentence, because Zionism is anti-Semitism.
That was expressed also on... that I remember Slavoj Žižek, Slovenian philosopher, said on the Frankfurt Book Fair immediately a few days after 7th of October, but was met with a lot of opposition and also protest leaving by some German officials who didn't want to accept that. But okay, we have tackled the issue of the extreme right, but can we just briefly, before the last question, stop at the issue of a German left? Because we see now that German left is kind of divided on that issue. We have different groups trying to stand for everything that you identified, but at the same time kind of exclude Palestine, like anti-Deutsche. And then you have at the same time left-wing parties such as Mera 25 who are speaking about Palestine and are putting that into focus. Yeah, what's happening on the German left, and do you see any potential there to actually add the Palestinian issue to all the other issues that they're otherwise standing for?
What I know from organizing with a lot of leftist groups is obviously that this divide didn't just come because of Palestine, but this divide between, the German left especially. It's a very German phenomenon, by the way, to have those anti-Deutsche that really say, well, we're standing against colonialism, but we're supporting Zionism, which is a colonial project. Doesn't make sense, but it is what we see. So from organizing with those groups, what I understand is that there are certain ideologies that are met with repression and others within the left that are not met with repression. So if you're a leftist and you want a leftist government, or you're striving for leftist values, you'll run way more smoothly with just excluding Palestine. It's just a roadblock you can remove. And if this is what you're striving for, then I don't know if you're really left. But that's the observation that I have. Another aspect to mention here, like from a Palestinian perspective, obviously, we as Palestinians never really got the chance to identify or be part of our own political discourse, because we were stripped away from the opportunity of having nationhood, having political process, having those hard discussions that we as people have to have with each other. I don't know if Palestine is a left issue as a Palestinian. I know there is a lot of left Palestinians that believe so, and rightfully so. But at the same time, please give us air and breathe, and air to breathe and space to also discuss this amongst us Palestinians, because we never had that chance. And I had this really, really amazing conversation earlier with Majd over there about should we have nationhood or not. But I think all those incremental questions around what are we within the political spectrum and who are the groups that should support us, I think it doesn't matter so much whether it's left or not. I think it matters when you see the values that you as a human being are trying to represent are being met for Palestinians on an equal level as well. And if you say no, you're inhumane.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think what's also worth keeping in mind that the fact that the German government is now ran by people who self-claim to be left, or whatever this means, but nevertheless, like, this left government is the most acute danger to the German basic law. It's the most acute danger to human rights. It's the most acute danger to international law. And I think it's quite striking to keep this in mind. So I think that the term left, maybe we should abandon it, because the meaning kind of lost throughout the way. And we need to focus on the mechanisms that generate the idea that one could theoretically justify what is happening. Not only this, but one could support it actively while continuing with the everyday life, while exercising exactly what Hannah Arendt conceptualized as the banality of evil.
And maybe just really adding, like, just to break it down as simple as possible, what we're seeing happening to us Palestinians is a right fascist regime. That's what it is. So anyone claiming to be left, or anyone claiming to be against Nazis, or anyone claiming to be against nationalism and all of those things, must understand that any nation state on this planet today endorsing the atrocities against the Palestinians by the terrorist entity of Israel must acknowledge that they're supporting right extremism, and that everything that they're going to say to justify that is just hypocrisy and double standard. And it's just the reality that they are supporting fascism, and we need to call them out. And that's Germany, and that's a lot of other European states, but it's also the US and the UK that claim to have risen from their past, but are endorsing the exact same policies and terror that right extremism has led humanity to in a completely different place. And we have to call them out, every single one of us, because they think they can play us, because they think they can whitewash this and pinkwash this and greenwash this. But we really, all of us, need to be smarter than this and call this double standard out.
Thank you to all, and I will follow your initiative to leave the politics aside, because essentially this is a question of genocide, and genocide is not a political question, it is a legal question, it's a moral question, but mostly it is a legal question. So let's finish our part with the issue of genocide. First, with the historic genocide that we thought will be the last genocide to discuss, or should be the last genocide to discuss after all the convention that have been accepted afterwards to never repeat it again. But sadly, we've seen it was not. New genocides happen on several levels, some of them recognized as such, some of them not, but essentially we are here again, and we are at the point where we are 8 months away further from the decision of the International Court of Justice, who found that the violations of the Genocide Convention were, at least at the end of December of last year and beginning of January of this year, at least plausible. So there was at least a possibility, if not yet certainty, legal certainty, there was at least a possibility that genocide was occurring. What happened until then was nothing. And let's just finish with discussing that. So it is true that in Germany there is the historic guilt present and indoctrinated into every person that goes through the educational system. They are shown what the Third Reich has done, and they, in most of them, carry that guilt with them. And there is a responsibility of Germany to repair for that damage and to make sure that this never happens again. But why are the lessons of the Holocaust understood as to enable what is going on now for so many years? I remember very recently, after 7th of October, there was Deborah Feldman, a Jewish writer speaking for Markus Lanz, who said that, in her opinion, there is only one legitimate lesson that we can and should learn from the Holocaust, and that is the absolute and unconditional defense of human rights for all. For all. So not just for those who have already suffered that kind of violence against them, but for all, for the future and for the present and for the past. So let's just finish on that. How we can achieve that never again will one day really mean never again, and that for all will really mean for all. How can we achieve that the never again will also apply to Palestinians?
I mean, first of all, to me, there is only one solution, and that is intifada and revolution, and this is what we're striving for. It's not just for equality for all, it's our fight against the terrorist entity of Israel. That is what I am advocating for. When people ask about how do we move forward from this, the reality is the world is polarized and we're facing racism, and one issue matters more than the other. It doesn't matter how many Jewish people will say, yes, I am against another genocide, because they're also not being heard, and if not being heard is something they're also actively they're trying to actively silence them. And that is the reality we're living in. And if what is happening in Gaza accounts to genocide or not, doesn't fucking matter. Because it's been way too many Palestinian lives that have been taken and that are being taken right now. It doesn't matter if this is a genocide, because what it exactly is not, it is not self-defense. It's terrorism. And we have to start calling this out. This morning I saw a video of religious extremists from the terrorist entity of Israel praying for more Palestinians to be killed, holding the Torah in their hand, praying for more Palestinians to be killed and to occupy the rest that is left of Gaza. It was so easy for the West to label us Muslims as Islamists and terrorists. What do we call these people? What do we call Jewish extremists? What do we call them? Don't they exist? Don't we see them on a daily basis being broadcasted to us? This is the reality of a racist world, where Jewish life or Zionist life, I don't think Jewish life, but where Zionist lives matter more than Palestinian lives. And the Nusayrat massacre has shown this. The world reported about a rescue mission of rescuing 4 Israeli hostages, but killing 173 Palestinians in 5 seconds. And the world, the media celebrated this as a rescue mission. That means 36 Palestinian lives are less worth than 1 Israeli life. This is the math. This is what the world is calculating. It's dehumanizing us. So the only way forward is to abolish the Zionist entity. And the only way forward is for us to create those spaces where we can talk, because this is not about Islam and Judaism. It's about people that can meet eye to eye. It's about people believing and exercising human rights and calling out when the governments of the world and the corporations of the world try to say, but this is okay because this is what we have to do. It doesn't matter if it's a genocide or not. And quite frankly, who doesn't accept that this is a genocide, you just must be stupid. And I don't care. The reality is, go fucking out and demand justice and human rights for Palestinians. And demand at least. You know what I struggled so much with Germany? I was listing earlier what Germany didn't do. Germany wasn't even able to vote for a ceasefire. They weren't even able to say, yes, we are for a ceasefire. So then what are you for? Killing more Palestinians? Like that's the outcome of that, not being for ceasefire. So I want to make clear that for us, the bare minimum is ceasefire, but the full liberation is what we're striving for. And that means accepting humans as humans and guaranteeing rights for everyone. Doesn't matter where they're from or where they are, but specifically calling the double standards, the racism and the discrimination out that we face on a daily basis. And as much as I love this, I want to remind you all, and I know I'm talking a lot, but this is airtime, so I'm going to use it. Whatever you do and how important these conversations are, all of our main task is to amplify the voices from Gaza, is to make sure we get the images, the voices, their stories out, because they are living the terror. They are living the terror. They are living the terror. And if people like that come and say free the hostages, then they must be disillusionized. They must be drinking the Kool-Aid that Israel is spreading around the world and is fueling the world with hate. Don't engage. Amplify the voices from Gaza. Thank you very much.
I second everything Salah said. And I want to stress that there is no other way but to holding together in times when those who are in power try to divide us, and they are trying their best. We feel it on our bodies. We feel it on our everyday life, and we see it on live social media, not media, social media. We see it live, what is happening now in Gaza, in the West Bank, in general, everywhere between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. So we need to keep on doing what we have started. We need to keep creating spaces, holding spaces. We need to keep on connect, to strengthen the network that we are building since before the 7th of October. But it became more urgent now than ever to be part of it, actively be part of it. Look around you, ask around you, ask questions. It's okay not to know everything, but ask the hard questions, because you will be surprised that the answers are so clear at the end once you see it. And we need to be able to name reality as such, precisely in times while those in power do their best to gaslight us. When we are talking about democracy, human rights, and international law, and those who are in power call us Israel haters, it's quite telling. And what it tells us is that those in power are nothing else but genocide lovers.
Okay, thank you very much. This concludes our part. This concludes my speaking. So here are our guests, and they will be glad to answer your questions and address your comments. So anyone that has a question, just come a bit forward so that I can hand you the microphone, and let's continue this discussion with you.
Thank you so much. This was very powerful and informative and also charging in a powerful way. So actually, like you mentioned, the conventions, and obviously we are give up on institutions, give up on conventions, because conventions proved to be hypocrite and not applicable for all lives. So elaborating in Intifada, what kind of tools or mechanisms, as you can give more examples, that we can join, where, as I was talking to a friend earlier, where we can uproot the rights instead of taking them. So not waiting from them to give us the rights, but to uproot it, because what we uproot, they cannot take. So what kind of tools and mechanisms that we can do from here against our complicit governments who are pretending to do something, but they are doing nothing? How to break up from these institutions? What kind of more examples of tools?
This? Yeah, okay. Thank you so much. This is a fantastic question. I don't know if I have the full answer to, but as someone who's been organizing for quite some time, obviously, an initial step is to create awareness and get the critical mass to actually be forced to engage with the topic and know that the topic is around the society and so on. I think what we need to do is to dismantle the systems by building our own systems, by not being reliant on their systems, by not waiting for them to give me money or give me work, but to create my own work and to create my own value that I can share within my own community, by making sure that I don't rely on a system that claims to provide me with security where it's clearly not, where it's clearly actually endangering me, but creating a system of allies that is protecting me. By making sure that I divest and that I boycott, and as much as people are talking about it, we are way more. We are so many more than those large corporations, and if we divest and boycott and we do that without resting, this dismantles systems. It dismantles the way they approach us. It dismantles the way they advertise and the way they create those claims that they cannot even substantiate. They stand for fairness and equality and DEI and all those kind of things. When we show them that we have the power and we can create those systems by doing them very, very practically, as starting our own businesses, maybe not in the system that they are rooted in, but by creating our own initiatives and helping our own communities to reach a critical mass to do that. And I'm going to give you one example. And I don't strongly believe in petitions, because petitions, they obviously also operate in a system that, and I saw this ban Israel from Eurovision kind of petition there, and great that someone started it. But the reality really is that petitions also rely on a system that we're already living in, and a system that is built on repressing us and oppressing us and silencing us. So a way of doing that, for instance, was the Airbnb case, where Israel obviously, and a lot of people were hosting flats and homes in occupied Palestine. It's illegally, obviously, internationally, all wrong, but that is like officially wrong, and like everybody has to accept that it's wrong. And the petition gained so much momentum that it really forced Airbnb to stop all listings in the West Bank. Similar applies to Ben & Jerry's. Ben & Jerry's stands as like nice ice cream, standing up for human rights and equality, but when it comes to Palestine, it's nothing. The people that were constantly boycotting them and confronting the business that claims to stand for those rights were able to make sure that Ben & Jerry's isn't being sold nowhere across occupied Palestine. And that is strong. And I think there is way more things to do, and I would love to have that conversation, but this is what comes up top of my head. Thank you.
I have nothing to add.
You want to pass some more? There we have a question.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. First, thank you for taking your time. I wanted to ask, I'm not really that educated on this, but I wanted to ask, can we use in the discourse, or is this even a legit information, when you talked about their agreement between Zionists and Nazi Germany? I mean, Nazis. Is that the Havara agreement? can we use that, I'm a student from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and usually we have that space to talk about everything that is right now happening in Palestine. And I really want to bring about the awareness about everything. And and of course, because it's a faculty, we have to, have a bit more of a research and have actual agreements and documents shown into light. So have you talked about the Havara agreement? Is that something that's in Discord? Is that connected to the...
It's pretty much connected, because I was telling before that Zionism is anti-Semitism. And the fact that Zionism or Zionist institutions were collaborating with the Nazis, it's quite telling, right? So I think I think it's a brilliant idea to take a closer look of how this agreement came about. Who were the main actors there, and what was exactly negotiated, and what, even perhaps thinking, what about the fate of non- and anti-Zionist Jews according to this agreement, for example, right? Those are a few examples that I think would be interesting to take a look at. And honestly, I would love to read your paper once you have it done.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Some more questions? Or there we have also one. There behind.
I don't really have a question, but I would just like to add something to you said. Do we call it a genocide, what is happening today in Gaza and the occupied territories against Palestinians or not? It's not a legal question, because international law is very, very clear what is genocide and in definition of genocide. But in a way, yes, of course, the deafening silence of the governments and, let's say, academics and the others, and the violence against those who call this genocide, even journalists and self-censorship or censorship, because all governments, all states are obliged to prevent genocide, not when we have hundreds of thousands of people killed, no matter where. And this is not happening today. Nobody. And I'm sorry, I'm not a Palestinian, I'm a journalist. I'm a journalist in Slovenia. I can use the word genocide, and I still have a job. Nobody spits on me on the street. So while I can, I will do it. I promised my Palestinian friends and also my Israeli friends who are living there and are living under the oppression and the endless wars that I will do it until I can. But we can speak, that's why we are all here today. And it's important that we call not self-censorship us when we speak in these public spaces. And I'm glad that this is happening in the open space, even tourists can hear. We had a group of German tourists. They had some comments. But anyway, thank you for your fight and your bravery. And tell us, what can we do for you?
Really appreciate it, and thank you so much for speaking up. And it's these days the least bare minimum thing we can do is to speak up and be facing the repression we might face. I don't think the question should ever be what can we do for people that are loud and active, because it means that other people that are not as active are not active, and I think everybody is active in their own way and in their own capacities. But what we should all ask ourselves is to what can we do now to help the people in Palestine, and especially those in Gaza. But let's not forget, everyone in the West Bank is experiencing pogroms. We've seen more than 700 Palestinians being killed since the 7th of October in the West Bank. So the violence and the settler violence and all of this is increasing as well. And one very concrete thing you can do is to go to the West Bank and to join an organization called Faz'a. And what you can do is, especially as a white passing person or as a white person, is you can go there and you can go with Palestinian farmers to their farms and you can protect them. You can protect them from settler violence by recording, by standing next to them And it's powerful. It's protecting Palestinians on a daily basis from the violence that has so intensified since the 7th on them in the West Bank. And another thing that we could all do is obviously constantly put out images about what is happening in Palestine. And a protest is not enough. We need disruption, we need action. We need to confront those that are endorsing it. We need to go to politicians' homes. We need to meet them when they go to work. We need to not let them rest in their everyday life because they're endorsing it. And it's something that all of us can do. So don't ask what you can do for us. Ask yourselves what you can do for Palestinians.
You know, thank you so much for the feedback and for the question. As Eva mentioned before, I was fired from the Jewish Museum last year in October for using the term apartheid. And since then, I do not have constant job. I'm pretty much dependent on panel discussions and also the support of my community. And since you asked directly what you can do to support us, I am struggling a lot at the moment financially. If you appreciate my work, it would be essentially important for me if you could support me also a bit with money, as they say. And you can take a look at Patreon, if you're familiar with this or not. We can talk about it later. You can subscribe to my channel on Patreon. My name is Udi Raz, U-D-I-R-A-Z. Let me surprise you how little I actually need, but at the moment I don't even have this little. So thank you for considering.
There's one more question. Can you come closer, maybe? All right.
Thank you both. Salah, thank you for actually showing us emotion. We're not meant to suppress it. So it was very refreshing to see you be natural. You know, it's a very, we have the right to be angry and livid and with rage. To the journalist and to all, I don't even think it's a question of genocide. I think it's way worse, right? We can't isolate an act of the government, of the entity or the regime, as he called it, as being, you know, one offshoot. No, I don't even think that today we have the legal terms to actually, or the political terms to describe how vicious and brutal and inhumane this system is. You know, we're talking about apartheid, colonialism, etc. With that being said, I just, you know, two offshoots. You did a brilliant job of showing how, in fact, Zionism is an anti-Semitic ideology, right? But it's becoming increasingly hard to move away from that and say that it's not a religious conflict, right? I mean, look at the Israeli government. They're very outspoken about this being a religious thing, and you talked about the videos of the Jewish rabbis or so on, and even the U.S. Right there's this whole evangelical approach to defining this as an existential fight, right? Nevertheless, I think what I want to fast forward to is, first of all, do you think that international law remains the framework from which the Palestinian situation should be contextualized, should be, you know, these tools, are they still relevant to us at all? That's one. And two, do we still think that, you know, it's one thing to put, you know, the German government on the spot, to put the media organizations, to put all these people under the spotlight, and to take all these actions for arms embargo, the BDS, etc. But do we still think that these are states or state institutions that could be reformed somehow, right? Because it seems that, you know, once we do that, we break the facade of democracy and so on, especially in a corporate capitalist system that has reigned unabashed for the last 30 years, right? I mean, I don't know how we make a small business as Israel is an imperial outpost at the end of the day. So that would be the second question. And the third one, and I think that's for you, I don't know if you have an answer, right? But what do you think Palestinians should be doing right now? aside from surviving and trying to stay alive and trying to stay well, what is the message that the Palestinian nation should be putting out for solidarity? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. I have only the second question in mind. I'm sorry, I will refer to it. Yes and no. I mean, this is the framework that we have. It's a bit like imagining how can you be non-capitalist in a capitalistic world, right? You have to put yourself in relation to this mechanism that governs us. And so I wish we could aim to beyond, and this is what we should do, and this is what we are doing. But we nevertheless need to understand the potential to work within the framework that governs us. And one of the possibilities is to use mechanisms that once has been were designed in order to prevent what we're witnessing now in Gaza, and before that in Kosovo and in other places, in Serbia and in other places. And also keeping in mind that for me it's very personal, you know, the concept of international law, of human rights, this is what I grew up also within the Zionist knowledge production, to understand that all those legacies were written with the blood of my ancestors. So I'm not going to give up on those legacies so quickly. And this is not too much also to ask for, to uphold to international law. And I think for me, as long as I can speak, this is what I'm going to do, not in contradiction to, but in addition to envision and meeting and networking with other individuals who have bigger visions of what else we deserve. Yeah. I appreciate the question. I think it's, for me, like I cannot register exactly the different aspects that are constitute the question. I would love if we can sit later on and talk. Oh. Yeah.
I will also add something because you gave me a thought about actually where genocide comes from. The crime of genocide, as codified now in the Genocide Convention, international legislations, was actually developed based on the Holocaust experience. Even though genocides were happening before, but they were not called a genocide. A genocide was a term developed by Lemkin after he saw Holocaust, and then it was codified. So it is not the end of the development of law. There is always a possibility to redefine something or to define something that didn't have a name before. There is also a legal article about one Palestinian scholar about introducing a new legal concept, Nakba. So I just want to add that international law is not a closed system. It's not something that was put in place and is how it is, and if it's bad, we can just leave it. It can also be improved. It can be strengthened. It can be added to. And the power of international law, even though there is no enforcement on the international level, like officially, there is no world police and so on, there is an enforcement that is a duty of every state that is a member of United Nations. So maybe that's also important to highlight what we can do here in Slovenia, where the situation is different than in Germany. We are in Slovenia and we can pressure our government, we can democratically demand for our government, our elected officials, that they uphold these rules of international law, as it is part of Slovenia's duty to stand for its obligations under the, for example, Genocide Convention. So I just want to mention that, and now back to you.
I think it's a brilliant question, and my political scientist background, like, it breaks my heart to say this, but I really don't believe in those institutions and frameworks anymore. The reality is we have seen that those frameworks have been exploited. Those frameworks matter for some people and for others not. And I love the point that you're making. The only point for me as a Palestinian where it matters is that people can see the hypocrisy and the double standard in those frameworks. That you, as citizens of the city, can realize But this accounts to genocide. And my country, the elected officials I've chosen, have committed to international law. So you need to take it to the streets and hold them accountable. And if they don't, you need to abolish them. That is the only value I see in this. Not more, not less. And the reality also is, it's not the only convention that is relevant for Palestinians, right? And so, as sad as it is, no one is really caring. Like, if Netanyahu, being warranted by the ICC, gets invited by the American Congress to loudly speak, proudly speak, and proudly lie as an ICC warranted person in the United States of America, then something is fundamentally wrong in this bullshit system. And why it's wrong, and why we have to question those systems and institutions and the frameworks they put out, is because, quite frankly, they've been implemented by white people. They were not inclusive frameworks, or a lot of people of color and indigenous people and everybody who's part of this group and beyond were not considered. It's the same thing as when Uri says, well, Germany introduces a new definition of anti-Semitism, but no Jewish person was included in this process. Then why the hell would it matter? Because it's excluding the reality of those people that are most affected by the crime. It's the same thing as when companies say, oh, we're going to set up net zero goals to curb climate change. But we're not considering those people that are most affected by climate change, which are people in Pakistan, which are people in places of the global south that are not being considered. And that is, for me, where it fundamentally doesn't make sense to, maybe we should adhere, but maybe we should not endorse and follow them, or at least criticize them. When it comes to what Palestinians can do, to be honest, I think it's a really hard question, because I feel like we've been so much on the defense. We've been all the time having to justify what we do, have to prove people that we're humans, we love our food, we have a great culture, music, amazing art pieces and all of this. And I wish that we wouldn't have to, or we wouldn't be forced into the situation of showing how rich and beautiful and happy our traditions and culture is, and that you're seeing us enraged and mortified and barely, as you said, trying to survive. I wish we wouldn't have to do that. But I still believe the one thing that we Palestinians can do for Palestinians is to try and navigate through the divide that the Zionist entity and other people are trying to put us through when they make differentiations between Gaza, between the West Bank, between people in occupied Palestine, and between Palestinians in the diaspora. I think we need to unite, and that's the only way out of us, for us. And when I say we need to unite, is we need to create work for each other. We need to create communities for each other, safe spaces for each other. We need to uplift each other, and we shouldn't try and forget about each other when we make it somewhere far in America. But we should really, really do our best to protect our fellow Palestinians.
Hi, thank you so much for this discussion. I am not sure if I'm going to say the obvious, but I am just feeling the profoundness of this very moment where we see a Palestinian and a Jewish sitting together and having a conversation. And while this might not be a rarity in many geographies and political spaces, it is in our space. I come from Zagreb, and we have not had conversations with our Jewish fellow citizens in very many months now because of the silencing and cracking down their voice. And we have not seen any solidarity shown from our Jewish citizens towards Palestinians now for over 10 months. And that is concerning, and that is scary. And even the intimate dialogues are not happening anymore, and they were happening. we do come from a space of a non-aligned movement where there was no question whether we support and recognize Palestine. We always did. And only towards the war in the Balkans, there was a shift in we switched over to support Israeli Zionist project and kind of forgot about the anti-colonial colonial and decolonial politics that we shared for so long with Palestine. I am saying this because here in the audience, and not everybody might be aware of that, are people from the whole Balkans who are currently organizing pro-Palestinian movements and who are trying to establish both intimate and public dialogues with our Jewish fellow citizens. And that's the profoundness of our time, no matter how scary it is and no matter how much oppression we are feeling. I do have a question for both of you. It is really a big question for also the Palestinians in our movements. What is going to happen with Palestinians, but also with Jewish people in the Middle East, especially if the regional war breaks out? What is going to happen, and how do we approach Jewish people in support of Palestinians, but also in support of their own legacy? How do we support their voices and amplify their voices too and their experiences who are so relational to what's happening currently in Palestine?
Thank you for the question. What I had to think about as you were asking, where does it take us, is a conversation I had, a chat I had last week with a close friend of mine who is trans, who started to take hormones. And I asked them, we were talking about what is the end goal, whether there is an end goal in this process. And this person, this close friend of mine, told me something that really struck me. And they told me that they started to take the hormones without really knowing where it ends, how the body will transform, in what directions, what you will end up with. And I think, but instead it was rather the commitment to the process. It's this feeling that the body that was before needs to go through a transformation, and the end goal is rather secondary to the understanding that we urgently need to engage in this process, even though we do not yet have a clear understanding of what is this end goal that we wish to have. And as long as the heart is in the right place, I think that we are doing the right thing. I think it's secure enough to say that we are now fully 100% committed to the process, even though we do not yet have the name to name the final goal. I hope it makes sense.
Thank you so much for organizing and trying to bring those people together, because it's important. And as much as I love this analogy, I slightly disagree, because I think we can only commit to a process when we have an aligned vision. And to me, as a Palestinian, it's so important to now continue to shape that vision, but to make more than anything clear that Zionism has no space. It needs to go fully. That doesn't exclude living with fellow Jewish citizens. We Palestinians have lived with Jewish people. And I think it's a weird comparison to say Palestinians and Jewish people. Like, no. Like, you can say Muslims and Jewish people, Christians and Jewish people, but you cannot equate. Like, that's a fundamental issue with the Zionist entity. The reality that it tries to say, well, we're an ethnicity, but we're also a religion. I'm sorry, no, that doesn't work for others. Why are you so special? You're not. And we have to break this. We have to break this idea of Zionism in order to liberate not only Palestine, but so many people that need to be liberated. So to me, the vision is an end to Zionism and everything that comes with it.
Because the time is running, I will ask you to ask the questions to our speakers later on, because we will be moving to Metelkova and the event will go on and they will both be there. So please, I think I can speak in your names to say that you are very much in the mood for continuing this discussion, but now we will have to slowly end here as for the change that we are here outside and everything we have to adjust to the program. So now I will just give you the floor for some conclusion if you feel like, or if you feel like some concluding remarks, then I will say my part and we will move.
Again, just thank you all so much for being loud and for participating in all those occasions where we have to remember, you know, Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. And as much as I might be prosecuted for this in Germany, it will be free. Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. So thank you for that.
Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. 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 From the river to the sea.
Thank you.
Yes.
From the river to the sea. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you.
Maybe the most fundamental thing to take with you from this discussion, or I mean, not the most, one of which, to keep in mind that Zionism is not Judaism. The liberation of Palestine from Zionism means also and always the liberation of Judaism from Zionism. Keep on staying loud, keep on staying visible. See you on the streets.
And from my perspective, I will just say thank you to both guests to answer to our call and join us here and talk about these important issues. And thank you to everyone in the audience for everything that you've already done in order to shed light on what's going on and to contribute to stopping it, and also to everything else that you will do in that regard. And yeah, I just want to highlight that it is our own responsibility of each and every one of us to look beyond our personal problems, to look beyond what personally concerns us and see that actually the problems of the people on the other side of the Mediterranean Sea are also the problems that are concerning us. And because we were speaking about Germany and its horrific history of the previous century, I want to end with a quote of a German pastor, Martin Niemöller, that you all know and you've all heard in so many different variations, but it tries to highlight and condemn the silent complicity, and is trying to highlight the importance of us being engaged with the pain of others. And it is the one that, you know, when he says that at first they came for the communists, but I did not speak up because I was not a communist. Then they came for the Jews, did not speak up because I was not a Jew. Then they came for the trade unionists, I did not speak for them because I was not a trade unionist, I was not a Catholic, I was not any of these groups. And when they came for me, there was nobody else that would be able to speak for me. So yeah, let's speak for those who cannot speak for themselves.